Hello, students in English 2393 and Women's Studies 2393. Welcome to our next online class. We're going to be dealing with two short stories here that have some things in common. They don't seem like it on the surface, more than just being written by women. But one thing in common is that they're dealing with women who are in or thinking about being in relationships, long-term relationships. I guess you would say they are in a relationship, Louisa and Joe. It's kind of an odd one, but it is. And certainly Delia and Sykes are in a relationship, not a good one. But also, though, these are two short stories that, although they're written about 3.5 decades apart, share some things. And one is, I want you to look at the structure of these stories. They're very neat. They're very, as I say at the end of this slide, they're very tidy in terms of their narrative structure. The character development is just enough. It's not a novel. We're not going into all the background. We're just giving you just enough so that you've got the gist of who this person is, know just enough about her qualities or his qualities to make the story actually move and work. These are both very economical short stories. There's not a lot of extra in it. It's really just designed to aim like a laser beam at one basic point. Okay, which is very nice. Meaning these are crafted very well. These are short stories where the authors are in control of their subject matter, and they very much are short stories, not novels, not novel wannabes, none of that kind of thing, not novellas. They are very much in control of the short story that they're writing as part of a genre. Okay, so it's kind of neat. Not too much, not too little in some ways. I'm going to start off with Freeman because, and if you know anything about Freeman, she lived with her best friend from childhood for 20 years. Which, of course, makes everybody speculate. We have to go there because we're just such nosy people, aren't we? We're just really nosy people. And I don't want to get into the questions about people's sexuality or sexual preferences. It's everybody's business. It's your own business what that is. It's just, my comment is that we just have to know about everybody's business all the time, right? But of course, we have to speculate. And so, but after 20 years living with her best childhood friend, she decides to get married to, I think, a banker. I think if that's I recall correctly. I don't recall, and I have no idea how their marriage was. I can't speculate. Unlike Gilman, we really and Chopin, we really don't know that much about Freeman's marital bliss. But suffice it to say, what's interesting about it is that she was a participant in what was nicknamed in those days a Boston marriage. Now, a Boston marriage was where two unmarried women, they used to call them old maids back in the day, would live together as friends, allegedly. Okay, I'm sure in most of the cases, probably they were just platonic good friends, right? I mean, that doesn't sound unreasonable. They wanted to live together, care for each other, spend time with each other, share the expenses of living on their own, and so on. But there's no question that under some in some situations, the relationships were more than that. Okay. I don't know why they were called Boston marriages. You can look it up on your own. I guess it just was a kind of I guess there were a lot of single ladies in Boston who decided, well, I don't want to live on my own. I want to live with a best friend or whatever. But there's no question that there were some of those relationships that were more than just friendship, and that they lived together under cover of this sort of unofficial tradition of the Boston marriage kind of idea. But there were also probably, many, many women who simply wanted to have a roommate and a best friend and to hang out together and do stuff together. They were besties. So what do you make of the fact that Freeman was in a Boston marriage for 20 years and then married a dude? I don't know what to make of it. And frankly, I'm kind of embarrassed about prying. But anyway, people love to speculate about writers and famous people in their private lives. We still do it today. Check out TMZ. Anyway, with respect to this short story, our two main characters, Joe and Louisa, of course, are engaged to be married for 15 years. Why do they have to take so long? Because he's over in Australia and he's got to make a fortune for himself in order to be married. Now, that was not terribly uncommon. It wasn't common for a man to say, I have to go make a fortune to get married, but it was not uncommon for someone to say, well, I can't marry this woman, or you can't marry my daughter, or we shouldn't get married until I have enough money and have enough start in life that I can support a family. So says the guy. So that was kind of an expectation. Either you owned a farm or something. I mean, it just wasn't something that middle class people did. They didn't just run off and get married without anything. And he needed to have a job, or he needed to have some sort of way of making a living, or they wouldn't be able to get married. And so he does that, and it takes a lot longer than what they thought. He gets involved down there, and he makes good money for himself, but it was a more of a time investment than either of them thought. I think they write to each other somewhat, but hardly see each other except for the first year or so. And for 14 more years, they just kind of grew apart. It's not that they don't love each other. It's that they love each other differently, perhaps, than what they did when they first got engaged. Now, that's very interesting here. And of course, there's a chained dog in the backyard. I don't know what to make of that. You figure it out. I mean, that seems like the dog is kind of emblematic of something, right? I mean, people love to talk about marriage and chains, being chained down and all this kind of stuff. You do what you want with that. It's kind of interesting. Let it float out there. Is it a person? Is it an institution? Don't know. It doesn't seem like there's an awful lot of critique here about marriage itself, just these particular people and how they approach things. Of course, Louisa is concerned when Joe comes back because she's so used to living on her own and she's so used to doing things her own way that this is going to be highly disruptive to have this guy live with her. Her family is pretty much gone, have died. She lives alone with a housemaid who helps take care of things, and she's very particular about, I mean, you might say just super particular, right? On the verge of neurotic particular about the way she does things, and she's got the house all decorated the way she wants. And when she gets married to Joe, her greatest fear is that he's going to bring like man things in the house, right? She's going to be dirty, and he's going to have muddy shoes, and he's going to possibly break something that, is delicate in the house. So she's got like doilies and china and everything all over the place. And in fact, when Joe comes to visit, he feels, I think the phrase that she uses is he felt like a bear in a china shop. He was nervous the whole time he was there that he was going to knock something over. Mess up some doily, mess up some curtain, some frilly thing, and he didn't feel comfortable in there either. And so there you got a bit of a problem. Speaking as someone who didn't get married until I was almost 30 and was used to living on my own from age 18 to age nearly 30, I can sympathize a little bit. You do after you've been single for a long time. You're used to living on your own. You're used to doing things your own way. I'll give you a short story here. I always did all my laundry every Friday night, period. That's what I did, okay? Other people were out having a good time. I was studying and trying to get a PhD, and then when I was first out of graduate school, I was grading papers and teaching and whatnot. Saturday was fun night, but Friday night was do laundry and read at the laundromat. Okay, I mean, that's what I did. I did all my laundry for the week in one night. I didn't do it like every couple of nights or so. When I got married, my wife first of all said, "Get out of here! You're not doing laundry. I'm doing it because you won't know how to do it." Never mind the fact I've done it for 12 years, and I'm going to do it on certain nights and so on and so forth. So I was largely exiled from the laundry room of our apartment and later house. And she still won't let me do the dadgum laundry because she's afraid I'm not going to do it right. And so this happens. It really does. If you wait too long to get married, you get stuck in your ways. And there's like, I do one thing and she does it another. I put the car keys one place, she puts them another. We've been married for 26 years and we still do it differently. So I can sympathize a little bit. So this is kind of a peek into what happens to people who have promises and who have obligations, but it's kind of not a good idea to fulfill them, right? Maybe it's better for everybody if we don't follow through, but they kind of feel, but I have to because the other person has, I can't do that to her, or I can't do that to him. Luckily, of course, happenstance, of course. This is kind of why you could make a TV movie out of this real quick. You could make a Hallmark movie out of this for sure. And so she just happens to overhear a conversation between him and Lily Dyer, and then she says, "Oh, I just can't do this," etc. So it all works out for everybody's benefit and happiness. I think what it does do is it's a little bit not revolutionary, but a little bit better, is a little bit progressive, if you will, is that you have a short story here where a woman doesn't end up finding happiness through marriage. She finds happiness through singleness. Singlehood? Singleness? Yeah, singleness. Singlehood. I'm going to make that up. Singlehood. And that would be kind of an unusual thing in 1891. Even today, there's this expectation that if you don't get married, something might be wrong with you, or people might, speculate about your preferences and that kind of thing, which I think people hopefully don't do that anymore. But they still think there's something wrong with you. Maybe you're quirky and odd and you can't get married, or nobody wants to live with you because you're a weirdo or something like that, which is totally unfair. I mean, some of the happiest people I know are people who have been lifelong singles. Saying, "Man, I just would never get married. I just love being single. I can do what I want. I can go where I want. I like being in charge of my life. I do not want to get chained down to somebody." But in 1891, you can only imagine that, particularly for women, there was huge pressure to get married. And so this is kind of not a radical short story, but it's one that kind of is a little bit more progressive, saying, you know what, it's not for everybody. So it's kind of a nice thing here. And I think it also makes a statement about people growing apart after a while. Sometimes we sacrifice so much, you can't go backwards. And there's nothing wrong with that, and it's not a bad thing. It's just a truism about life that people grow apart. When they're not together, they develop into different people, and we mature, and our compatibilities change. I mean, you're not going to be the same person at age 28 or 38 as you are at 18. You're just not. You're going to be a different person. And some people, if they get married early on, grow and mature together, and they remain compatible. Some don't, sadly. But it's really hard for you to maintain a mutual growth when you're not together. And I think that's one of the things that Freeman is kind of acknowledging here. In some ways, you could argue, I think, that the short story is not even about marriage at all. It's just about people and the way we develop and grow as human beings. And that there's too much emphasis on marriage, because that's kind of what she talks about that's kind of what you're left with at the end of the short story, is a woman who's perfectly happy not being, in fact, she's relieved not to have to get married to the guy, not because she doesn't like him. She'll always love Joe and he'll always love her, but they're not in love, and so she's just actually kind of happy and relieved that she doesn't have that burden of having to follow through on a commitment that she kind of doesn't want to anymore. That's a very different kind of thing than what women were being sort of spoon-fed through literature for women at that time, that all of your happiness resides in being able to get married. Okay. And so she's trying to offer an alternative. So I'm not saying it's anti-marriage. It's just non-marriage is an option. And, I think that's kind of an interesting sort of thing. A lot of criticism in this short story about sort of this reinforcing gender stereotypes, that women are all about delicate, pretty things and men are all rough and tumble and whatnot. Make of it as what you will. Is it realistic? Is it stereotypical? Is it almost? I've even heard someone say it's almost semi-allegorical, that Joe and Louisa don't even seem like real people, but they're more like stick figures or collections of gender stereotypes. Okay, I'll give you that to some extent. But on the other hand, maybe that's the kind of character development she needed in order to make the very clear thematic point that she wanted to. Maybe. Sometimes simplistic sorts of characterization makes it more possible to achieve a thematic point than more complex characterization. I don't know. You decide what you want. But again, a very tidy tale. I use that term because, Louisa is very tidy. A very tidy tale in terms of its narrative structure and the twists and turns of the plot and everything and all of that. Also a tidy tale one with a great deal of bite to it. Oh gosh, he's so full of dad jokes, isn't he? Is Hurston's Sweat. Now we're sort of fast forwarding quite a bit here because this is 35 years later, I guess, if my math is right. And Hurston's a fascinating writer. By the way, she's a writer that was just unheard of, ignored for eons until, I guess, in the last 20-something years, people have rediscovered her. Sad story. I mean, she was a great writer, a terrific writer, wrote some wonderful novels and short stories, had great critical success in the 20s and 30s, and then just her career just kind of dived after that. She ended up working in different kinds of odd jobs, certainly not in literary jobs, and died in relative obscurity in the, I believe, in the 60s, and very unfortunate. And only after her death, only a few decades after her death, did people start rediscovering. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine who's the chair of the English department did her dissertation on Hurston, and also has authored a number of articles and books on Hurston. She's part of a sort of a renaissance, if you will, of Hurston. This is a person who, when she was living, was not considered a great writer, just an interesting one. After she died, no one really knew who she was for several decades, and now is beginning to be seen as one of the greatest American writers of the 20th century. So, I mean, I think she's fantastic. I think she's every bit as good as a Hemingway or a Fitzgerald, if you ask me, but I'm partial to Southern writers anyway. She, of course, was part of the group of writers who came from all over the country and settled in Harlem in the 1920s and 30s, part of the Harlem Renaissance. Go look that up, if you will. It's you can do a whole class, obviously, on the Harlem Renaissance. But it was this vital group of artists and writers and musicians and philosophers and political thinkers and intellectuals who happened to be African American and who settled in Harlem because that was a mecca, if you will, of African American culture coming together at that time and in that place. It was a fascinating thing, and it, of course, created this enormous explosion of brilliance on the part of African American culture and a real flowering and flourishing. And she was part of that. And unfortunately, after the war, after World War II, some of that waned as people moved to suburbia. And there are a lot of reasons why it happened. No literary movement lasts forever. But she was kind of forgotten as a result and kind of died in obscurity and poverty. It's very sad. What does Sweat tell us about Delia Jones and about Sykes and about their community? I think it's a very interesting thing. Interesting story. Again, character development is pretty clear, pretty plain. These are not terribly deep and nuanced characters. They're who they are. Okay. Sykes and Delia, of course, have a relationship. They're married. They've been married for 15 years. There's another coincidence there. And but for the first month or so, it was been just largely a miserable marriage, and an abusive one, a terribly abusive one, where Delia, if she doesn't have marks and scars on her body from Sykes's physical abuse, her face and hands and body bear the emotional abuse, right? Talks about how she's kind of gnarled and muscled and bony and knobby because of work and worry and all of these kinds of things. Sykes, basically, I guess you couldn't come up with a worse villain in some ways. He's just a scumbag. Him and his skank, Bertha. Sorry, she's a skank, right? She just is. She's a terrible person, right? She's perfectly okay with the idea that Sykes is going to kick Delia out of the house she worked day and night to pay for, and you're going to kick her out of that after he did nothing and give it to some other woman who didn't do a thing except, sleep around with a married man. The community has his number. They know who he is. The men know who he is. They know what he's all about. He's a good for nothing. Everybody. One fellow says he's not worth carrying guts to a bear. not having him carry guts to a bear. Let me just tell you something. If you ever get the job of carrying guts to a bear, you won't last long in that job because bears like guts and they'll eat you too. That's the whole idea behind that phrase, is he's not worth carrying guts to a bear. And so they know what he's like, especially the men in town think he's just a scummy guy. And they know Bertha. Bertha can't even get a place to live other than Della's rooming house, which is probably, I guess the implication there is it's the lowest of the low because the women don't respect her. So these are the two scummiest people in town. Everybody knows it. Nobody approves of their behavior. They know better. And they all look at Delia and say, what a shame that she has to put up with him, et cetera, et cetera. Well, not for long, right? We get to see what happens there, don't we? And there's a lot of course, here you got a central symbol here in the story. The house is a symbol, right? It's a symbol of what? Well, gosh, we could go forever on that, but I think you can throw a few things out on your own, can't you? It's a symbol of her autonomy. It's a symbol of the investment she's made in her own self-worth and her own dignity. Why does she say she wants to have a place when she's old and that are of her own, right? She wants to have a place where she can, put in flowers and have a nice, I mean, she's not looking to build a mansion here. She's not thinking, well, I'm just going to build an empire. I'm willing to work 7 days a week, right? And he makes a big deal out of her being some sort of hypocrite Christian. When in fact he certainly doesn't mind eating on Sundays, does he? She has to cook to do that and take care of him, doesn't she? He never has complained about her Christian hypocrisy when she goes to that kind of trouble. But she the house is a symbol of all of her aspirations, and her aspirations are incredibly modest. I just want a house that I don't want to have to worry when I'm old whether I've got a place to live. Right? That's very modest. And Delia is someone who says, I don't ask for much in life. I put up with a lot. I'm not afraid of working. And I never did leave this guy, although honestly, I could have and should have. But I just, the one thing you can't take away from me is the thing that I've invested for all this time. Well, that's exactly what he wants to do. And of course, his practical joking with snakes and that kind of stuff comes back to bite him in the rear, doesn't it? And so, well, not evidently in the neck, right at the jugular, in fact. And so another question here, is this story a story about marriage at all? Or is it about something else? I mean, they're in a bad marriage, yeah, but it's really not about being in a bad marriage and what to do about it, because she doesn't really do anything about it. It's about somebody getting what he, I guess, deserves, I guess. It's really about her independence and her autonomy within an abusive marriage, and then quite, evidently after an abusive marriage, and the preservation of that and how important that dignity is. What you work for should be yours, right? And of course, then we go back to the title and what the title indicates. The title is about sweat. It's not about privilege. It's not about gifting. It's not about entitlement. It's not about anything. It's about, I sweated for this. And you can't take away something that someone sweated for. I mean, I think that's part of what the title is about. It's about other things, too. You can look at the passage where she talks about sweat quite a bit. Whose sweat is it? It's hers, not his. It's hers. It belongs to her. And so, you can't take it and you can't go give it to somebody who certainly didn't do anything for it. And that sweat is sweat is a sign of dignity. In some ways, some people think it's upper class people. Oh, he's a working person. He's got dirty fingernails, etc. You know what? Dirty fingernails are a sign of integrity. Hard work is a sign of character. And I think the use of the term sweat for the title here, the word sweat for the title here, indicates something along those lines. You decide. But of course, there is an ethical question at the end, right? Well, she doesn't kill him, but she could have probably done more than what she did, or maybe not. Maybe she was so frightened. This is worth looking at the passage for just a real brief moment, because is she just paralyzed with fear? Or is she sitting there and saying, you know what? You get what you got coming. I believe some character early on said something about you get what you sow. He comes in, and he's the one who brought the snake in. He's the one that put it in the basket. He's the one that's been out drinking. She runs off into the hay barn, and the light goes out in the house. She's not going to go back in there. He does. But while he's in there, I don't hear her holler out, "Hey, Sykes, stay away. There's a snake loose in the house." She doesn't do it. Okay. A little moral culpability there. I don't know. You decide. At the end, though, when, of course, he's screaming in there, animal screams is what it's described as, she doesn't do anything. It's true that they lived so far from a hospital that he probably was going to die anyway with that kind of bite, but she didn't know where the snake had bit him. She didn't know it was right in the jugular, which would pump that venom straight to his heart. She didn't know that. Maybe he got bit on the ankle or the finger. I don't know. But certainly by the light of day, she sees him crawling towards the front door and actually inching his way out. He crept an inch or two towards her. He sees her. He sees her off behind the chinaberry tree. And he sees her with that one eye, right? The rest of his face is all bloated and everything. It's really gross. All that he was able, she saw his horribly swollen neck and his one open eye shining with hope. Why is it shining with hope? Ah, there's Delia. Help me. Not gonna happen. Okay. A surge of pity, too strong to support, bore her away from that eye that could not fail to see what? The tubs, right? So look at it real carefully. A surge of pity that she felt was too strong to support. She couldn't keep looking at him. He was so pitiful looking. It bore her away from that eye. She couldn't look at his eye. But what was the eye looking at instead of her when she turned away? The tubs. What tubs? The wash tubs. Now we see something going on here. He would see the lamp. Orlando with its doctors was too far away. She could scarcely reach the chinaberry tree where she waited in the growing heat, while inside she knew the cold river was creeping up and up to extinguish that eye. Right? So he's getting cold. He's dying. Right? That venom is coming into creeping up and up and up to extinguish that eye that must know by now that she knew. She knew what? She knew. He's able to see in his last moments both the wash tubs, and he's able to realize just before he dies, no, she does know I need help. She's just not going to give it to me. Right? That's what the eye sees and knows. Okay? Eye is a window to the heart. Right? That's what a lot of poets will tell you. That the eye, which must know by now that she knew. She knew. She knew he was bitten. She knew that he was dying. And the last thing he realized in his brain before his whole body and brain went cold was, she is not going to help me. And that's the end. Lights out, Sykes. Interesting, right? It's all building towards that lovely effect. I say lovely. It's dude dies, but building towards this lovely, wonderful, very, very. I don't know how to describe it. Tidy's not a good word, is it? I'd say masterful, very spot on, very, very clean, very neat conclusion there with just the right oomph, right? In the old days, there was a TV show called The Twilight Zone. Most of you have never seen it. If you ever get a chance to see a rerun of it from way back in the day, even before I was born, some of these episodes were. But they were really well written, very well crafted, 30-minute little episodes where right at the end there was this twist that made you go, ooh. right? That was the hook of the show, is that it was so well written that you kind of sometimes didn't see the ironic ending coming at you, right? And right when you did, you would turn the show off, and for a good 10 or 15 minutes you'd talk about it because it was such an interesting little twist. She would have been a great writer for television shows. I'm going to tell you right now, she would have been a great writer for that, because she knew exactly how to just right at the end and you kind of know he's going to get what he's got coming to him. You just don't know how. But that still doesn't take away the suspense. You see any Alfred Hitchcock movie, and you always know the killer's he's there. Hitchcock will even see you come, let you see him coming, right? But it's because you know what's going to happen, you just don't know how, that it's even scarier. And so she was quite good at that. I invite you to read some more of her stuff. She's really terrific. All right, well, let's talk about a quiz real quick. 2 questions. Who's old Caesar? And how does Sykes die? That should say Sykes, not Psych. As in psych. It's Sykes. How does he die? Well, we just talked about that, okay? So, send me your quizzes by Tuesday at midnight. We will have a discussion session online. I'll post that up as soon as I get this thing posted, and we will see you in class on Thursday. Trying to get all of the midterms and the papers graded before Thursday if I can, okay? See you in class on Thursday.